some of the important terms. Great, now we're recording it. Okay. It's important to know about terminology, so you use the right words and not use the wrong words, because using the wrong words is hurtful, whether intentional or not. Discuss the way that LGBTQA plus, and that's what I'm going to use mostly as an acronym today, how folks experience discrimination and oppression and what that means to them, how that affects them, and then ways to counter that and how to be supporters of the LGBTQA plus community. So this is kind of cutesy, but I sort of like this image as a way to start talking about gender and sexuality. It's a good reference point because it separates sexuality from gender. Old adage that sexuality is who you go to bed with, gender is who you go to bed as. This also recognizes that gender identity and gender expression are different from each other, that someone may identify a particular way, but they don't necessarily express themselves that way in terms of their gender for a variety of reasons. For example, they may not be out, may not be comfortable in a given situation presenting as their gender, or their gender may not be easily presentable. I identify as genderqueer, which I'll talk about what that means. There isn't an easy way to present oneself as genderqueer. I have a genderqueer button on my backpack, so there's that. But really, there's not a way I can dress in a genderqueer sort of way. So that's one of the reasons why it's important to be not assuming people's pronouns, because people may not be presenting in a way that easily identifies their gender. I also like this model because it recognizes that you can be varying degrees attracted to different individuals, experiencing gender identity or gender expression in various ways, that it's not a simple straight line with like attracted to women on one side and attracted to men on the other, let's say. Recognizing that you can be attracted various ways to different genders and experience your gender and sexuality in various ways. I also like this model because it separates sexual attraction from romantic attraction, recognizing there are folks who may not experience both in the same way or may not experience both at all. And this model also recognizes that people can experience no sexual attraction or no romantic attraction, which oftentimes doesn't get talked about. But I'll be talking about that today. So when I was a college student back in the day, this is the terminology that we had to talk about the community. Lesbian, gay, sometimes bisexual, more often than not, unfortunately, not. And trans sometimes, and when trans was brought up, it was either TS, you were transsexual, or CD, a cross-dresser, depending upon if you had plans for surgery. There wasn't a space for folks who were non-binary, as we would refer to the term today. There wasn't even a term back in that day to refer to people like myself. So as someone who didn't feel myself to be either a cross-dresser or transsexual, I really had no place in the community until some of that language began to be developed in the 1990s. Now today, there's, oh my God, there's just, you can't keep up with all the language. That because of social media, new language gets invented all the time. Someone comes up with a word for something and puts it on a blog or Twitter or Instagram, what have you, and other people see that and say, oh wow, that's really a good word. We really need that. Like sexual, which sounds like it's a sexually transmitted disease, but it's a word that came up to describe people who are attracted to folks who are non-binary. Someone, and I've never gone back and looked to see what the origins are, but someone at some point recognized we need a term for this, God damn it, and put that term out there, and other people saw it and said, yeah, that's an important term to have. So it's now become part of the predominant LGBTQ plus lexicon. So it's really easy for terms to get invented. We've had just a plethora of terms being invented in the last decade. Mostly describe non-binary gender, non-binary sexual attraction. I'm doing a book right now on LGBTQ plus college students, and this is a chart I have in the book. to sort of get a grasp on some of the major terminology and where they sort of fall in different bubbles. I have changed this diagram like a half dozen times in the years I've been working on this book, because terminology just is always changing and always new words being added. So it's hard to keep up with it, but it's important to recognize some of the main terms, because that's really affirming how people identify. So I'll talk about now some of the main terms that are being used today. And I originally set these slides up to have a Spanish language next to it. So there's a lot of white space in the slides for that reason. Unfortunately, it didn't work out to have the Spanish be right next to the English. And so that's why there's a lot of white space. Yeah, I'm gonna share the slides with Caitlin afterwards, so you can all get a copy of this. And if you want the handout of the terms, there's a website that has that on it. That's on that page. I'm going to assume people know what the L and the G are. So I'm going to start with the B, which stands for bi or bisexual. The way this gets defined by folks in the community is different than you often hear it talked about in straight society. It's not being attracted to women and men, because that's a very binary concept. It doesn't recognize the diversity of gender. So folks in the bi community talk about being attracted to people of more than one gender. It may not be all genders. It may just be some genders, or attracted to people who are similar in their gender and people who are different in their gender. So in that way, it's still a binary in a way, but it's a binary that includes everyone. And here's what the bi flag looks like, which came up with in 1998. Michael Page came up with the bi flag, and these are the colors that are for the flag, which is different from people who are pansexual or pan, who are generally defined as people who are attracted to others regardless of their gender. You know, bi people may be attracted to people, and gender may be a part of that, or they may be attracted only to certain genders. Pansexual individuals or pan individuals generally are attracted to people, and gender is not a big part of that formula. And some people use the terms interchangeably for themselves or identify as both. I know some folks who are pansexual because people don't know the term and think it's like you're attracted to pans, crazy shit. That they'll use bisexual in general society to describe themselves, and will use pansexual when they're talking to folks in the queer community. And we don't know when about mid 2010s is when the pan flag came up with, but we don't actually know who did that. The T is for transgender, which is a relative term for anyone whose gender identity expression is different than how they were assigned at birth. We don't say transgendered, just as we, I guess, wouldn't say Asian or Jewish. And it's not a noun, so you don't say transgenders. It's an adjective, so you say trans people. Usually, trans is where we've sort of gone to. Instead of saying transgender, trans is seen as a more inclusive term than saying transgender. So people are using trans more today. The opposite is cisgender, cis, so people who are not trans. And that comes about because trans in Latin means across, on the other side of beyond. Cis means the opposite in Latin, on the same side next to. And there are generally two flavors of trans people: binary trans people, trans women, trans men, and then non-binary folks, which is a general term for anyone who doesn't fit into a male or female gender category. And as I said, there's just a huge number of different non-binary identities. The majority of younger trans people today identify as non-binary and use a whole host of terms. I put some of the main ones here: agender, feeling like they don't have a gender; being demi-gendered, feeling sort of partly gendered; being gender fluid, their gender changes over time in different contexts; genderqueer, identifying as neither male nor female, as both or somewhere in between; and then being androgynous. So a whole host of different non-binary identities, well beyond those, but those are some of the main ones. Queer is a term that was traditionally pejorative, obviously, and for some folks it's still that way. But for most younger people, it's a term that they've taken back. They've reclaimed the power for themselves, and many younger people use that to describe themselves, describe their community. Oftentimes it's used as an umbrella term for anyone who is has a gender or sexual identity outside of cis heterosexual. So kind of a shorthand, instead of saying LGBTQIA+ or A+, we use it. Some folks also use that as their specific identity, to either label their sexual orientation or their gender identity, either because they've experienced it as being more fluid, or as just simply not feeling comfortable putting themselves into a box. And as I said, a lot of younger people identify as queer because if they feel it better fits themselves, it's a more political term than, say, like lesbian or gay is these days. So a lot of our students identify as being queer, or will use the word queer. But it's not accepted by all people. Older people, I'm a historian, doing research with older folks. A lot still use the word homosexual, because that was the word that was used when they came of age, and so for them it still works, it still fits them. And queer is still a word that has a lot of hate for them. So there's really a generational difference there, and also other countries as well. Some other countries, the word homosexual is much more commonly used. But these days, the word homosexual, if someone is using it, generally speaking, it signals two things. One, that they don't know a lot of out folks who would like say that's not a really appropriate word, because the word homosexual was developed in the 19th century to describe what was then seen as being a mental illness. Obviously, it's not a mental illness, so it has a lot of negative baggage attached to it. So it's really outdated and pejorative. And the other thing is, if you're using it, it sends a signal that either you're ignorant or you have very conservative views. That if you like tune into Fox News, which I never do, but I'm told that you'll see them using that word there. So it sends a signal that you're not at all supportive of the queer community. The I is for intersex, which is an umbrella term for folks who in some ways have a biological variation that's different than the standard male-female pattern. And this describes a whole host of different variations that are very much natural. You know, we as a society like to make everything into a binary. And human beings don't work that way, whether it's gender, whether it's sexuality, or whether it's simply biological, that people's anatomy doesn't fit neatly into one of these two boxes. And we see that very clearly when we try to do athletics. You know, there's a huge controversy now about individuals who don't have either XX or XY chromosomes, or don't have a particular level of hormones that fit what we consider to be appropriate for how they were assigned at birth. Because human nature is not that clear. It's very much a continuum with different variations. But it's not something that we talk about very much in society, that doesn't get recognized. It's still really stigmatized. So even though you see here how common it is for people to have an intersex variation, depending upon how you do the counting, it's as common as people that have red hair or green eyes. Not a lot of people are out as being intersex. Like, I don't know any students on our campus who are out as being intersex. I know a staff person who identifies that way, but not outwardly so. I know a few other folks in my life who are who identify privately as intersex. I don't know anyone though who's out as intersex. There's a couple of youth groups that exist, and people are trying to take away that stigma, but it's still something where we don't see very much visibility because it is such a seen as being a shameful thing to have a body that doesn't fit what's expected for male or female. So we often don't use the I because I don't want to be putting the I out there when we don't have intersex individuals who we're talking about. So as a researcher, the book I'm writing, we don't talk about intersex very much because there isn't any research that exists on intersex college students, for one, or very little on intersex people in general in this country. So I don't want to be tokenizing and putting it out there if we don't have people that we're really talking about here. I don't want to be inclusive when we're really not being inclusive. Different, the A though, which is also sort of a stigmatized identity, especially given the way that youth culture is highly sexualized. It's really hard for people to be out as being asexual, as not experiencing a sexual attraction or experiencing little sexual attraction or experiencing sexual attraction only in specific contexts. But that's starting to change. We're seeing more and more young people identifying as being asexual. We have an asexual group on our campus. That wouldn't have been the case 5 years ago, and certainly wasn't the case nationally 10 years ago. But now a number of college campuses have asexual student groups, and we're seeing a growing visibility of asexual students. When we do ask about our incoming students what their sexual identity is, asexual is up there as one of the more common identities. You typically, bisexual far exceeds any other identity, and that's long been the case. Gay is typically second, and then depending upon the year, asexual might be the third largest identity group. Sometimes it's lesbian. Pansexual is also up there, but there's a very large asexual population out there that's starting to find its voice and wanting to be visible, and that's wonderful to see. There's also people who are aromantic, who don't experience much romantic attraction. Again, recognizing the need to separate sexuality from emotional or romantic attraction. There are also other terms that you'll see, just like you have demigender, you also have demisexual for people who experience attraction in certain contexts. And then you have the people in the gray area who are somewhere between being sexual and asexual, or romantic and aromantic, which we refer to as being allo, as instead of saying sexual, we say allosexual or alloromantic. And then some other terms just to complete the picture here. Talking about discrimination, oppression. I like to use the word prejudice rather than phobia, because hating on people who, because of their sexuality, gender identity, is just that. It's hatred. It might be ignorance, that people don't know any better, so they say inappropriate things. But it's not a phobia. It's not a fear. So that's really not an appropriate way to phrase it, because I think in some ways saying it's a phobia really downplays just the malice that's there, the hurtfulness that's there by saying it's a phobia, like, I don't know, being afraid of spiders or of heights or something. And so in terms of talking about sexuality, gender identity, we talk about heterosexism, the ways in which people are privileged if they are or are seen as being heterosexual, and the way in which people who are or are seen as being LGBTQ, pansexual, etc., are disparaged, are put in a lesser position because of how they are or are perceived. And then genderism is the same thing in terms of talking about cis people being privileged, and then trans people or people who are perceived as being trans as being disparaged, thought of lesser, and not having that same level of privilege. So let me ask you, like, I don't want to have just me be talking here. If you want to use the chat, that'd be awesome. What are some examples that you can think of heterosexism? Okay, movies or TV shows where there's only hetero couples. Yeah, that's really, you know, I've been doing this work for 20 years, and that's one of the big changes I've seen is just the representation in TV and movies. I remember, you know, when Ellen DeGeneres came out personally and as her character in 1997, just what a huge issue that was. You know, it was national news. It got covers on all the magazines and such. And her show got canceled the following year because it became too politically controversial just to have an out lesbian character, out lesbian person portraying that person, and advertisers didn't want to touch it. There were boycotts, attempted boycotts of those who were advertising on her show. You know, fast forward, I think it was 5 years, you know, she gets the Ellen show and becomes hugely popular. And of course, she's still a lesbian. You know, nothing is changed in that regard, but society has changed. It's sort of caught up somewhat, and so people, her show has been hugely popular. In recent years, sort of, you know, slumped off with some of the controversies about mistreatment of staff. But, you know, for years and years was like, you know, one of the top rated shows, Emmy winning. You know, she's loved by people. So just how things have changed is just really phenomenal to see. But yeah, just how representation can still be an issue, especially for talking about different parts of the LGBT community, like still not representation of bisexual people very much, for example. Talk about this a bit later, but like asexual people are almost entirely invisible. Trans people, we're seeing some work being done there, but it's only what, 2 years ago, I think, that we had the first non-binary character on any TV. Like that's ridiculous. Now we have like a few. So we've gone from 0 to I think 3. So it's still ridiculously underrepresented, but progress is being made. Let's do other things. Asking about a partner, right? Assuming that they're in a different sex relationship. Yeah, that's something that people need to sort of unlearn. And I think, you know, being at least where I'm sure everyone else in the group is, but living in Massachusetts, where we were the first to have same-sex marriage, I think we were ahead of the game in some of that unlearning process, to not making assumptions that if someone is partnered or someone is married, that person is of a different sex than themselves. Right, making assumptions about people's attractions. Give you some examples here. Assuming or acting as if everyone is heterosexual, conveying, whether overtly or subtly, that heterosexual is normal, and being LGBTQ, asexual, pansexual is wrong or unnatural. Oh, went the wrong way. Showing displeasure toward individuals who are LGBTQIA+, whether consciously or unconsciously. Good example of this, real quick, and this was a number of years ago, but I don't know if anything would be changed with this. So I was doing a presentation here on campus, and one of the staff people came up to me afterwards and said, I want to share something with you. And I said, sure. And she said, for years I was married to a man, and that relationship ended. We got divorced, and couple of years later, got involved with a woman. That was not the cause of the marriage ending, but she got involved with a woman, and she noticed she was treated differently at work by her coworkers. And it was nothing that was said negatively, but it was just the subtle signals that people sent to her, that they didn't ask about her partner anymore as they used to ask about her husband. She felt that people weren't inviting her to social situations as much anymore because they may be uncomfortable that she would bring her same-sex partner with her to these events. So nothing that was like really overt. And if you were to ask the people who she worked with, they may have denied it, may not even recognize that it was how she felt, but that was what she perceived, that people sort of distanced themselves from her personal life because some of them were seemingly not comfortable with her being involved with another woman. So it doesn't have to be something that's really blatant. You know, we think of discrimination as someone who does violence against someone who's LGBTQ plus, or goes to a pride parade and you know, puts a sign up, you know, got AIDS yet, or you know, some crazy awful hatred thing like that. You know, sort of the Archie Bunker stereotype for those who are old enough to know what that means. You know, but that happens, unfortunately, and unfortunately that's coming back again, with the political climate becoming what it is. But that's thankfully a minority of what happens. The majority is more the subtle, smaller things where people are not being, or don't consciously think they're being hurtful, but they are. So it's trying to recognize those smaller things that are not so overt, and just recognizing that LGBT, I'll add the T here, oppression is significant, that it's something to be addressing. It's something that I've had to fight for. It's a lot easier in the last 10 years than it was in the previous 10 years to get people to recognize that this is real. That discrimination, oppression is not just about racism. It's not just about sexism, you know, some women being discriminated against, which was back 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. That was what I got from a lot of people. You know, we don't need to add sexual orientation or gender identity to our non-discrimination policy. It's not a big issue. Well, yeah, it is. So moving on, what are some examples of genderism? Ways in which people who are perceived as being cisgender are privileged, don't have to think about their gender identity, and ways in which people who are seen as trans are experiencing oppression. Seeing some comments about heterosexism, about same-sex marriage being recent, right? 2015, you know, is when we got same-sex marriage. The Supreme Court affirmed that. Very recent history. High schools, you know, being not letting same-sex couples to proms, that still happens, though that's fortunately mostly just in really conservative school districts now, because courts have sided with students around that. How our bodies should, okay, going to genderism, how our bodies should look, right? You know, very clear standards of what a woman should look like, particularly. You know, beauty standards, you know, apply to men as well, but really women we focus on have to look a certain way. And, you know, you look at any magazine, will show you that. Right, pronouns and assuming he and she. Lack of characters, right? Yep. some things that I came up with, assuming that and acting as if everyone is cisgender and that there are only two genders, which folks mentioned. Again, conveying that being trans is abnormal or wrong. You know, for years and years, we had to fight to get it out of being seen as a psychological illness, just like gay people had to get the psychiatric profession to stop seeing them as being mentally ill. Trans people have had to fight that fight as well. And that's not entirely won yet at this point, sadly. Again, being uncomfortable, apprehensive around people who are trans, whether consciously or not. And I've talked about the denying that genderism is an important thing. Yeah, children's programming is especially
Programación juvenil, especialmente cuando se orienta a personas.
Allison, you've broken through to the English channel.
Oh my God, I'm sorry, you guys.
Okay, thank you. Jenny, you might just have to repeat the last thing you said because we had some overlap.
Okay. Just I think one thing I said was we're seeing in the last few years just a real growth in the number of kids books that are for trans kids, really for all kids though, to show gender diversity, and just kids books that are trans inclusive, that recognize that there are more gender choices, more gender options than M or F. And that's just been phenomenal to see. You know, a generation ago, we saw that same thing with inclusion around sexuality and recognizing sexual diversity. You know, the pioneering work of Leslie Ann Newman, who I just adore, with Heather Has Two Mommies and all the other work she's done to promote family diversity. We you know, that was a generation ago, and now we're seeing the same thing with trans inclusion. And because kids who are gender different, who recognize themselves as not being male or female, that's something that we know happens for a lot of kids at a very young age, that they're starting to question who they are, how they've been assigned at birth. So it's really critical to be having these resources, age-appropriate resources, at a very young age, because these kids are recognizing themselves oftentimes at a very young age about who they are, and need to feel included, need to feel like that they exist. You know, because there's such difficulties with youth in particular experiencing depression and suicidality because of feeling not accepted, not included. See other chat comments here. Oh, gender reveal partners. Oh my God. Talk about a trend that, like, where the hell did this come from? Yeah, that's just so destructive. I realize that we have to try to put kids into a box, you know. Don't have to, but it makes it easier to be able to assign a gender to someone. But you need to recognize that that's a big tentative there. But thankfully, the kid at a very young age is going to recognize, in most instances, how they identify. So if you look at the equipment and it tells you one thing, and they tell you something else, they're gonna tell you at a pretty young age. But the whole idea of gender reveal parties and pink and blue diapers, oh my God, it's almost like fighting back against, you know, how society's become more inclusive of gender diversity. It's almost like this is sort of like a regression. Like, no, we want to keep things as a binary. Thank you very much. Even if it means, like, there have been people that have been killed at gender reveal parties, like when things explode and someone gets killed or injured, or there have been forest fires because of pyrotechnics going out of control at gender reveal parties. So it's not only stupid, it's dangerous. So yeah, that's just really incredible. You know. So let's see what else here. So we need to talk about non-binary sexuality. bisexual, pansexual people. The word that we talk about typically is monosexism, for people who are attracted to only individuals of one sex, one gender. So people who are exclusively heterosexual, exclusively lesbian or gay. And this is important to talk about because there are specific forms of oppression that people who have a non-binary sexuality experience. For sake of time here, I'll just go through some of the things. Assuming that someone's sexual partner is who they are. It's an interesting thing, right? That, as I said at the beginning, sexuality different than gender identity. But we use, though, the gender or genders of someone's partners to define their sexuality. And of course, that doesn't work if they're attracted to people of more than one gender. You see someone with someone and say, oh, that person is gay, okay, or that person is heterosexual. Maybe yes, maybe no. So it makes it really hard for someone then who's bisexual or pansexual or queer or some other non-binary sexuality to be able to claim space, to be able to be seen. Because how, again, if you're bisexual, let's say, how do you put that out there? Like, obviously you can send a button or something that says, hey, I'm bi. The only thing you can do is have partners of different genders at the same time or serially, which of course plays into the stereotype that bisexual people are not monogamous or can't be faithful. So you lose that way. So it's really hard to be seen and be visible as people who are bisexual, pansexual, even though that's the majority of people who are non-heterosexual. As I said earlier, bisexual is by far the largest group in the LGBTQ+ community, but yet it's also probably the most invisible and the most often erased. And it gets erased all the time. As a researcher, as someone who does a lot of work around reviewing articles for different journals, it just blows my mind sometimes to see how often the B is not included. Just even though they use LGBT or LGBTQ or LGBTQ plus whatever as their abbreviation, they don't include bisexual people. They do a study and it's they don't account for bisexual people, or they lump bisexual people in with lesbian and gay people, assuming that they have the same experiences, which in some cases they might, but in a lot of cases they don't. Because if you're bisexual and your partner is of a different gender than you're not going to experience discrimination in the same way that someone who is lesbian or gay is and is with a same-sex partner. So there are some clear differences there. And it's amazing how historical figures who are bisexual behaviorally get erased, get seen as being lesbian or gay or as heterosexual. So it's really hard for people who are bisexual to have role models, although we're seeing more and more actors, musicians today being out as being bisexual or as pansexual or as queer. So that's helping a lot, I think, for young people to see that, to have that. And then for asexual people, as I mentioned, we talk about allosexual as a way to talk about people who are sexual, the opposite of people who are asexual. And then so the systemic form of oppression is allosexism, the ways, again, in which people who are asexual are disparaged, are erased, are marginalized, don't have the same abilities, privileges in society that people who are allosexual, who are non-asexual have. And here again, I can use pretty much the same sort of categories about being erased. That people make an assumption that people want to be in a sexual relationship, that someone either has or is seeking a sexual partner. And that's really a huge one to overcome, because we are so expecting people to be in a partner relationship. That is such a huge barrier for overcoming that sort of social assumption. And just seeing asexuality as the legitimate real thing. It's still so often the butt of jokes that, oh, you're asexual, you know, do you reproduce with yourself? You know, are you some sort of fungus or something? You know, like people don't treat asexuality as being real or legitimate. And you see surveys, you know, that ask sexual orientation, and they have lesbian, gay, and bi, of course, and heterosexual, obviously. If they're, you know, sort of progressive, they have queer, but oftentimes they don't have asexual on it. And that's like, that's just huge. It makes people really feel invisible, that they don't even count as having a real sexual orientation, that anyone cares about them to know about their experience. Yeah, and someone mentioned, thank you, Heather, confusing celibacy with asexuality. You know, people who are celibate have sexual attraction, but just decide not to act on it. Very different from people who are asexual, who experience little or no sexual attraction. And it still gets seen as being a mental illness. That if there's something wrong with you if you don't experience sexual attraction. And for some people, there may be some issue there that prevents them from being interested in sexual relationships, but majority of people who just, I'm not interested. It's not because I was sexually abused as a child, or I had a bad relationship and now I'm swearing off being involved with anyone. You know, it's not any of that stuff. It's just simply, I don't feel like that's who I am or what I need in my life. So let me turn a little bit to talking about research. I'm going to focus mostly on trans people because I think that's the area where people don't know as much, but we have a lot of research on trans people, thankfully, in the last decade. Most prominently, the 2015 US Transgender Survey, which is the largest study of trans people in the US. Actually, until 2011, when the Transgender Discrimination Survey came out, I actually had the largest study of trans people in the US. And now these two surveys that I mentioned here supersede that. And hopefully we're doing the US Transgender Survey again this fall, and hopefully we will surpass that 27,000 number. But that's really huge to have that many folks participating in the survey. Provides some really good data then. And you see here on the right the breakdown of how people identified for that survey, but equally divided between trans women, trans men, non-binary folks. Very different than what it was just 4 years previously, when the Transgender Discrimination Survey was published, which was actually a bit older than that in terms of its data. But you see that people who are gender nonconforming, which is what they referred to as being non-binary back then, were only 12% of the survey. So going from 12% to a third in just a handful of years. And that reflects just who is identifying as transgender these days. This is the age breakdown for the US Transgender Survey. 42% were traditionally college age, far exceeding general population numbers, which I have on the right here, where you see people who are 65 and older, just a tiny sliver of people who took the survey versus what they actually are in society. So the folks who are out as transgender skew very much younger than the general population. So that explains the huge non-binary jump, is because the folks who are out today as transgender, a lot of younger people, and identifying oftentimes as being non-binary. So I like the survey because it really gives you a snapshot of this generation, even though it's a survey of trans people, anyone who identifies as trans, from 18 to 100. it really, most of the data is younger people. So it's a good snapshot of younger people today. And you can see just discrimination that they have experienced. So in K-12, being harassed by people who knew because they were out or thought that they were transgender majority. Schools not allowing them to dress to fit their gender identity. That dress codes are still a huge issue when it comes to trans people not being able to present the way that they identify themselves. Thankfully, we have a very supportive school system in most of the districts in the Pioneer Valley. So it's not been a big issue here, and I've just been I've heard really great stories from a lot of younger people about their experiences in K-12 here. But that's sadly that's more the exception than the rule. See some other ways here: being physically attacked, being disciplined, even sexually assaulted, and then more than 3/4 experienced one or more of these types of abuse and discrimination. College experience, a little bit less than half were thought or out as being trans, and of those, about 1/4 experienced some form of harassment on campus, and a significant number left college because the harassment was so bad. And this was the harassment, and the level of harassment was much worse for people of color. Pretty much all of the negative experiences that trans people go through, it's worse for trans people of color because of the intersections of racism and genderism. I had the chance, the US transgender survey was primarily a quantitative instrument, a gazillion questions asking about people's experiences, and mostly, you fill in the bubble about like this is what my experience was. But we had a last question after you've gone through, and depending upon how you identified and what experiences you had, like there were sections for people who've been in the military, people who've been in homeless shelters, people who've been in prisons, people who were HIV positive, people who were sex workers. Huge number of different sections depending upon what your experiences were. When you got done with all of that, when you're answering hundreds of questions in some cases, there was the last question to ask you, so do you want to tell us anything else about your experiences? And I had the chance to go through that. And as far as I know, I'm still the only person who's actually gone through all that, because there was like thousands and thousands of comments that people made. Some just simply saying thank you, and some people writing pages. And I decided, someone needs to go through this and look at this. So I went through it, looking at what people said about their college experiences. And I have a whole presentation where I talk about that, but very interesting to see very generational differences when it comes to college experiences, that people from older generations, older millennials, Gen X, baby boomers, the older people invariably had a really awful college experience, almost without exception. Younger people, it was much more varied, and some really positive experiences, which was really wonderful to see. So that times they are changing, not fast enough, certainly, and not everywhere, but it was really great to see that younger people, some of them did have really positive experience, had colleges where they had faculty members that were supportive of them, administrations that they felt were supportive, where they were able to be themselves. They could live in gender inclusive housing. There were gender inclusive restrooms on campus. They were able to use the names and pronouns that they went by. So that was good to see that there was some positive experiences with that. Homelessness, just hugely disproportional for trans people. Just incredible. You see here 30% experiencing homelessness in some point in their lives. And again, most of these people are pretty young. So they don't have a long life here that we're talking about. And just in the past year, so this would have been 2014, 1 in 8 people experiencing homelessness. That's just, it's hard to wrap your mind around that. It's so huge. We still have a huge problem about young people when they come out as trans or their family finds out they're trans, getting kicked out of the house. You know, it's just mind-boggling. You know, I've been doing this work, as I said, for 20 some years, and used to be seeing a lot of gay kids who got kicked out of their house when you know, got cut off financially, when their families found out that they were lesbian, gay, some cases bisexual. Don't see that as much anymore, thankfully. Still happens, of course, but I don't see that very often. I see much more the opposite of families that are really supportive, who call me up, more oftentimes call me up than the students themselves, wanting to find out, like, make sure we're going to be an LGBT friendly campus. Now with the interwebs and all that, you know, and things online, you know, people look it up and don't ask me that so much. And people make an assumption too, as well, you know, especially these days being in Massachusetts, you can pretty much assume there's going to be a pretty supportive LGBT experience on campus. So that's a huge change. But for trans students, we're still seeing that same being kicked out of the house, being cut off emotionally, financially when they come out or get outed. And it's just so heartbreaking. But we're also seeing the flip side of that. I'm seeing families that are coming to me, wanting to make sure it's going to be a positive experience for their trans child, because that you can't assume. Even in a place like Massachusetts, you can't assume it's going to be a positive experience for trans people, because society's not very positive. You know, and colleges are a microcosm of the larger societies, as much as we oftentimes think we're a bubble. You know, people come here from elsewhere. They don't just stay on campus, right? They're in the community. People in the community, you know, and things affect people who are on campus. You know, so homelessness is a huge issue for trans people, sadly, and there are not enough resources to support them, and so often homeless shelters are very trans ignorant. I'll put it politely and say trans ignorant, and force trans people to be housed as how they were starting to birth, which is just so abusive and just so traumatizing for so many trans people who are already traumatized by being homeless. Harassment and violence just horrific when it comes to what trans people experience. It blows me away that nearly 10% were physically attacked in the past year because of being trans. And sexual assault, you know, it's huge when it comes to cis women, but it's far worse when it comes to trans people, particularly trans women being sexually assaulted. You know, it's just so hard to comprehend. But just, you know, the trauma that trans people experience, which gets reflected in the high levels of depression and anxiety, and how that plays out with suicidality. You know, numerous studies have shown that trans people have about a 40% attempted suicide rate, far exceeding the general population. And it's slightly higher among younger people. That's huge. And we don't do enough to really try to address that. That's why having role models, having images is so important. Because you don't always have a supportive community around you, and you need a supportive community around you. You need to see people that affirm who you are. And if you don't have that, in a physical presence. You need that in a virtual presence, or you need that looking at the big screen or at small screens to be able to see yourself reflected. So I want to spend a little bit of time for having you talk amongst yourself. I was hoping, I don't know, do we set up, and I'll stop screen sharing here for a moment here. Were breakout rooms set up to be able to do this?
Yes,
Glenn?
so I can open the rooms whenever you're ready. I'm just gonna stop the recording or pause the recording while we're in
Right.
there.
Yeah, so go ahead, have people go into breakout rooms. Maybe like 5-ish minutes or so to talk about what you can do personally or professionally to be more supportive of LGBTQ plus folks.
Okay, awesome. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and pause.
Let's see here. Okay. So love to hear what people talked about. If you would be so kind as just to put something into the chat briefly saying some of the things that you came up with for ways to be more supportive personally, professionally around LGBTQIA plus inclusion. Okay, being open to correction, making minimal assumptions. Yeah, I think that just trying to make assumptions, that's probably the biggest thing to try to do, because we make assumptions about people based upon how they appear, right? We make assumptions about their race, about their age, about the religion in some cases, about their class, and we make assumptions about gender. But what makes gender unique in all that is we make the assumption, but we also put it out there by how we treat that person, how we refer to that person by pronouns and sir and ma'am, Mr., Ms. Why? We can't be making those assumptions. Just so we can't make assumptions about somebody's race and know for a fact how that person identifies themselves. And we would never try to put out there, make an assumption about someone's race and put it out there, say, oh, you're a so-and-so. Because we'd be like, how the hell we know that, right? And we'd be seen as being inappropriate. Well, it's inappropriate to gender someone as well for that reason. What else got here? Having gender inclusive or non-gender bathrooms, definitely that's a huge issue that trans people face, of discrimination, harassment in gender spaces. What else here? Making assumptions, okay, related to a job. Okay. Other things people can think of. Yeah, I'll talk about being easier on oneself and being corrected in a moment. That's a good point. So some of the things that I came up with is, we know from the research that it's a whole different experience for trans kids and I would hazard to say LGBTQ plus youth in general. It's a whole different experience if you have supportive family versus unsupportive family. You know, this is from the US Trans Survey. You know, just the different experience when it comes to homelessness, attempted suicide, being in psychological distress of those who have an accepting versus a non-accepting family. That means all the world to a kid to have a parent or parents who are there for them. May not necessarily understand what they're going through, may not get them, but say, you know, I don't understand this, but I love you, and I'm going to support you, and I'm going to defend you. And you know, anyone who says something's wrong with you because you're gay or trans, you know, they're going to have to fight me. That makes all the difference in someone's experience, to have that support network, to go home and feel that it's a home. You know, some of that homelessness is because, like as I mentioned, young people being kicked out of the house. So it's a very literal, you know, of experiencing homelessness because of not having supportive family, that they get kicked out of the house. But just the negative psychological experience of not having a supportive family. That's very basic. So it's really important to try to stress to parents how critical it is to support their LGBT kids, because that just is going to save them, sometimes save their lives, but certainly probably save them from a lot of mental anguish. And if you work in social services, connecting LGBTQIA plus youth and their families to support services, to resources in the community. We're blessed these days to have a lot of resources. That wasn't always the case here. It wasn't the case. Folks and their families, so there are places to go to get support. Model acceptance for families. That's so critical. That, you know, they need to have role models just as much as their kids do in some ways. You know, to feel like if I have a community of folks around me that are hostile to LGBTQ people, it's really hard then for me to be accepting of my kid when they come out. So having a community network of other parents, families that are supportive can make a huge difference when you don't have a community around you if you're a parent of supportive people. And of course, for you to be supportive and model, it means that to address your own biases and prejudices. Which means unlearning how we're socialized about what quote unquote what is normal, what gender is and what's an appropriate gender, making assumptions about someone's gender and how someone should appear. The importance of learning terminology, like I said, it's just, I work with so many students, and it makes a real difference to them when they feel comfortable with someone. They can, you know, because so oftentimes if you're a trans person, and to a degree, if you're a cis LGBTQ person, you have your guard up a lot of the time, because you don't know where it's going to come from. You don't know when you're going to get harassment or ignorance, hatred. So you always have those defenses up, bracing yourself, because you know it's going to happen, especially the discrimination against trans people or the ignorant or hateful comments. It's just so wonderful to be able to let that guard down, to be comfortable with somebody, which doesn't mean that that person may not have their own issues, at times and screw up at times, but to know that this person is someone you can trust and someone who values you. That makes so much difference. And one of the ways to show that you care is by knowing terminology, so that you don't appear ignorant, because that's, people are more likely to be trusting if they feel that you are woke. So what they say today, right? So learning terminology is really critical. And of course, using the wrong terminology does the opposite. It says you don't give a crap about them, you don't know very much, and you're not very supportive. So it works both ways. Going back to the asexual piece, not assuming someone wants to be in a relationship, not assuming someone is heterosexual, which we talked about by how you gender a partner, making an assumption that the partner is of a different gender than they are. If someone comes out to you, trust and affirm that identity, which is especially important for non-binary sexuality people, because being asexual, being bisexual, pansexual are often seen as not legitimate. It's a fad. It's a phase you're going through. You'll grow out of it. So having someone affirm that and believe that is just can be really, really important for someone's self-esteem, especially a younger person. Language is just so huge. We don't need to use gendered language. And to really, it's again having to unlearn what we've been taught. In some cases, we've been taught that on our jobs and training, to be saying sir and ma'am as a way to be polite. But you can be polite just by saying thank you very much. How can I help you? It doesn't have to have that sir or ma'am at the end, and that just is just so marginalizing to have happen. As someone who's non-binary, it happens to me all the time. If someone sees my name and I'll get gendered one way. If someone is talking to me, I'll get gendered the wrong way another way. And I'm used to it. But for someone who's like just coming out, like I've been out for 25 years as being genderqueer, pretty much since the term was created back in the 1990s. I'm used to it, but someone who's just identifying as genderqueer or gender fluid or whatever identity, it can be very devastating to have someone not respect you and make that assumption. I just got my license renewed today, and love the fact that it has the non-binary now, so it's not an M and an F only as options, because that's just, you feel so invisible. Going to a doctor's office, going to a dentist and having to fill out a form and it has sex, quote unquote, M or F. It's just like, you just feel so marginalized. You feel like they don't know I exist. They don't care that I exist. So what kind of care am I going to get at this place? So it's just so important. And you're gonna, invariably mess up at times, and we'll talk about that. Using, putting a gender pronoun out there or using sir or ma'am. I got stopped for speeding today, and the police officer, and pulled me over, and being very polite, I said sir. I didn't even catch that because I was just so distraught that, oh God, I've been pulled over for speeding. Shit, what am I going to do now? But then looked at my license and apologized and said, how do you want me to what pronouns do you want me to use for you? And I said, don't worry about it. I have bigger things to worry about. Like, I'm not going to get a ticket now, but really nice person, just gave me a warning, even though I really should have got a ticket because I was really speeding. But I appreciate the fact that here's someone who misgendered me, didn't realized it after the fact, and then apologized and said, what should I be doing right here? That meant a lot to me, that the person did it, so hats off to the Hadley cops for or that Hadley cop at least for doing that. And I've done trainings for a number of the police, not Hadley though, which is, which worked out. Usually, if I get stopped in Amherst or Belchertown, they might, oh yeah, you did a training for us. So I might have better luck not getting a ticket then. Who knows? But yeah, if you don't know how someone identifies, ask them what pronouns they use for themselves. It's not. It may feel awkward to do that, especially at first, but it's probably less embarrassing than if you misgender someone and then have to apologize. For younger people, they get it. It's amazing to watch a lot of our students talk to each other. They just ask what pronouns people use. They share their pronouns just as a matter of course in a conversation. Hi, I'm so-and-so, I use these pronouns. What's your name and pronouns? It's just part of what they do, because this is a generation, Gen Z, that's growing up where they recognize gender diversity, that depending upon what survey you look at, a more majority or near majority say that they know someone who is open with them about using pronouns other than he or she. So that's huge. That makes a huge difference, because they're not going to make an assumption then, because they know people that don't use he or she. So they're not going to want to make that assumption because they know people that doesn't fit. You can, if you need to, you can use they if you don't, know someone's gender, and the person's not there to ask them. And of course, we do this as a matter of course when we don't know someone's gender. I'm going to pick up a friend of mine at the airport. Oh, who are they? You wouldn't say who are he, she, because that just feels really awkward grammatically. So we use the they when we don't know someone's gender identity already. We just don't use it in a context for an individual who we know who that person is. Don't be asking a trans person's name at birth unless you need to have it for paperwork, and then it should be treated as we treat a social security number. A lot of trans people refer to their birth name as being their dead name because it's dead to them. It's not a name that they use for themselves, one other people using for themselves. Don't be asking about trans people's bodies, what kind of surgeries they might have had, because of course we would never ask that about someone who's non-trans. Hey, what are your parts look like? No, we don't do that. So we shouldn't be doing that for trans people either. Obviously, if someone says this is my name, the name I use for myself, these are my pronouns, is to obviously respect that. And I sometimes see people saying preferred name, preferred pronouns. I really hate that language because it's not a preference. It's the name I go by. It's the pronouns I use for myself. There's not a preference involved here with what I'm using. If I say this is my name, I really expect you to respect that and not be using it, only when you have to. Some good ways to create a safe space or an inclusive space for trans folks is to share your pronouns, because it makes their person feel like they can share theirs as well. That is so huge for students when I talk to them. When someone puts their pronouns out there because, oh wow, okay, this person is going to respect me when I can share my pronouns, and if they're like they or them, which is what I would say probably about 90% of folks who don't use he or she use, that they're going to respect that if I put that out there. Like, have the space to put that out there. So it's so important to model that, because it creates a space where other people can feel comfortable being themselves. And again, let down their defenses. Like, okay, this person understands that people might not have pronouns that match how they present themselves, and so need to be asking that. And people can have email signatures and name tags that have their pronouns. A lot of our staff and student affairs here have their pronouns in their email signatures, which I would say I don't know a single soul who does that, who doesn't use the pronoun, besides me, who doesn't use the pronouns you would expect for them to use. So someone who looks very much traditionally female using she, her, and male looking person using he. So some people can look at that and say, well, that's not really taking much of a risk there. That's what I expected. But personally, I think that's pretty revolutionary, because what it's saying is you cannot make that assumption about me. Even though I look a particular way, you can't make an assumption that I use a certain set of pronouns, because there are people who look very similar to me who use different pronouns. So you can't assume that about me, because I don't want you assuming that about other people. There's a really great video on YouTube, and I sometimes use this in presentation. Someone who looks traditionally masculine. They use they, them pronouns for themselves, and they have a beard, pretty traditionally masculine build, and they get misgendered all the time. And they talk about how that makes them feel. And like, why should this person have to, like, I don't know, shave off their beard, let's say, or dress more traditionally masculine in order to be maybe not seen as he, or have people ask them how they identify? People should be asking, and they should not be having to always be correcting people because they are presenting in a traditionally masculine way, that they like having a beard. Yeah, and correcting someone who misgenders someone, or correcting yourself, is an important thing to do. And again, it could take some work. The best thing to do is, if you are talking with someone and you misgender them, is simply to say, you're sorry. That's it. Of course, if you're talking to one-on-one with someone, you're not going to be using third person. You're going to be using you, second person. So it won't be an issue. But if you're talking to a group of people and you're using pronouns, then simply apologize to and that's it. Or if you realize afterward, oh shit, did I just misgender that person? And apologizing after the fact. And if you just simply apologize, it makes a difference. There's a tendency, and this has happened to me, for someone to go on and on after they misgender someone. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I'm struggling with this. I'm just getting, I didn't grow up with this. I'm not used to having to be thinking about pronouns. This is not something in my generation. I don't want to hear that. Have that conversation with yourself or with somebody else, because that puts me into a really awkward position. So you just offended me, and now I'm supposed to feel sorry for you because you screwed up and made me feel bad? No, take it someplace else. Apologize and do better in the future. And doing better, as I said, can take some work. We have to learn this. Especially if it's someone you know already and are used to using a particular set of pronouns for somebody. It could literally take some practice. I had a student who, in the 3 years that he worked for me, the first year went by she and her second year, as he began to really think about his gender, went by they, them. And by the time he graduated, decided that he was a trans guy and has started to physically transition. And all during this time, didn't look any different, used the same name. And I'll admit, there were times when I was stuck in the they. And thankfully, I don't think I misgendered him to his face, but I certainly used they with other people, and they were nice enough to say, oh, remember, he now uses he, him. It's like, oh yeah, duh, you know, and so I had to practice, you know, say person's name, he, him, person's name, he, him. So it became easier then to, whenever I saw him, to get it right. Now it's a lot easier because he's changed his name, has been on testosterone for a while, so looks different. So I don't know, I would make that mistake to his face, but I've, you know, but it could take some practice, but it's important to do that because misgendering feels crappy to people. It makes you feel invisible, it makes you feel marginalized, it makes you feel disrespected. Like this is a good cartoon about like the over apologizing. You know, we all make mistakes. You know, and I think most trans people are forgiving. Where we're not forgiving is if people keep doing it, whether consciously or unconsciously, and that's something I am constantly fighting against with faculty and staff who are misgendering someone. And most of the time it's not deliberate. Had a faculty person last semester who was misgendering a student repeatedly, such that the person filed a complaint, and I ended up talking to the faculty person, and the person said, "Oh no, I'm a big supporter of LGBT rights. I'm not doing it deliberately." Well, really, that doesn't matter. You know, good intentions are great. We should have good intentions, but it's the impact. It's you're not taking the time to get this right, such that even other students in the class are calling you on, not just the student who's being misgendered, but other students in the class are saying, hey, you're getting this person's pronouns wrong. So it became an issue. You know, all you had to do is just learn. It shouldn't have to go to the department chair and to the dean of the college to get you to do what was right. And unfortunately, the student dropped the class because they just felt like this person wasn't respecting them. And that's a huge loss to that student. They couldn't take a class that they wanted to take because they just felt this was going to be an issue with this professor. That even if they started getting it right, that this professor was going to hold it against them, that they made this into this issue. So that's really unfortunate. If someone calls you in, and I say calling in versus calling out, because I think it's an act of care for someone to say to you, hey, remember so-and-so uses these pronouns. Because it's not trying to embarrass you. It's trying to make sure you get it right. So you're not making that person be misgendered to their face. So I always say, if someone corrects you, thank them for it, because they're doing an act of kindness, an act of compassion to say, hey, don't be doing that. And we need to be doing that. If you hear someone misgendering someone, it's important to say something. Because saying nothing is collaborating. It's going along with it. It's sending a signal that you agree. It's the same thing if you hear an anti-Semitic or racist joke and you don't say anything to the person about how offensive that is. they're getting the signal that what they're doing is okay. And it's sending the signal to other people who see this that you are agreeing with it because you're not disagreeing with it. So it's important to challenge that behavior because it is, whether intentional or not, it really is a matter of harassment to be misgendering someone repeatedly. Just as if, I guess, in a previous generation, male staff person calling a woman staff person sweetie or honey. You know, we moved on, thankfully. We need to move on in terms of gendering and deliberately or unconsciously misgendering. Can also check in with the person who's been misgendered and be there for them. Say, hey, I noticed that happened. You know, can I do something to support you? Do you want me to talk to this person on your behalf? If someone gets misgendered a lot, I can't tell you how much I appreciate someone having my back by saying something. So I'm not like the freaking gender police all the time having to correct somebody. When someone else says, hey, Jenny uses they, them pronouns for themselves, I appreciate it so much because I have that kind of support and not have to always be the one who's making an issue of it. Some other things, obviously if someone's saying things inappropriate, making jokes, you know, challenge that. Don't let people gender police restrooms. It's against the law in Massachusetts to be challenging someone's right to use a restroom unless they're doing something that's illegal. So if someone's photographing, videotaping, loitering to look at people, yeah, that's a crime and that should be addressed. But if someone's just there, literally doing their business, you don't have a right in Massachusetts to say anything about that. In your workplace, you can display LGBT inclusive images, symbols, rainbow flag, or the new handy dandy Pride Plus flag, which also incorporates the trans flag, also black and brown to represent folks of color who often get marginalized in LGBTQ plus communities. Recognizing there are a whole host of awareness days and weeks and months around LGBT groups. Pretty much every group has their week or day, or June being Pride Month for everyone. Recognize those in different ways through, you know, workplace things, social media. That's a really positive thing to do. I helped create International Pronouns Day a few years ago. That's to call attention to the importance of asking and respecting pronouns as something that can be marked to make sure that people recognize the importance of pronouns. Obviously, educating yourself is important. You know, don't just say, okay, I went to this training session that person at UMass did, and okay, I can check off LGBT. I've done that work now. No, it's ongoing work. It's, you know, when we do trainings, we refer to it now as being allyship. We used to call it ally training. We've moved away to call it allyship, recognizing that it's not a one and done. It's something, it's a process. You know, there's always more to learn. There's always more one can do to be a better ally. So it's not simply being an ally, it's being allyship. Which also sort of signals we never quite get there. We never quite reach the I'm an ally. You know, it's like, no, we're trying to be a good ally because we're gonna mess up at times. You know, and you know, we need to be okay with ourselves when we mess up and be okay with people calling us in and challenging it. You know, like you need to be able to say, okay, I'm still a good person, but I screwed up here, and I'm going to do better the next time, so that, you know, hopefully, you know, I'll make mistakes again in the future, but hopefully I'm not going to make the same mistake again, right? You know, hopefully we're learning something along the way. And be part of someone's support networks. LGBT, especially the T folks, oftentimes don't have a lot of support, especially younger people. So having people in their support networks so that they have a community, have a sense of belonging, is just so critical. Can't underestimate that. There are local resources, as I mentioned, and again, I'll share this presentation so you can have this information, but there are trans groups. There are also trans student groups. We have one at UMass. It's for all area college students. There are youth groups that now we have middle school youth groups, which is like, yay, it would be so long and needed a middle school youth group. Right now it's, I think, still on Discord. Actually, I should probably check in with them to see if they're still online, if they've gone back to doing in-person stuff. It used to be in person, both in Greenfield and in Northampton with Generation Q. I'm not sure if they're back to doing it in person or still online with that. Youth groups in Springfield, one that's also online for the book club, which even has younger kids for the elementary age students, which is so important because, like I said, people at a young age recognize their gender identities. Parents groups, there's a parent meetup group, which is really awesome, which is now back, I think, in person, which is a chance, for young trans kids to play with other trans kids, because it's oftentimes, your playmates are not trans, and so you feel like you're the only one. And it gives the parents a chance also to connect and to exchange notes and to have support. We have a pretty active PFLAG here. There are a couple other parent groups that exist for trans parents of trans kids. And that's it. I'm about 15 minutes or so. I'm gonna stop screen sharing here so that I can see folks' faces. If you're happy to answer questions, whether in the chat or if you want to unmute yourself, that will be hunky-dory too. I'm seeing if I missed anything in the chat here while that's happening.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions in the chat. And Pat, I don't know if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask those questions out loud, or I can share them from the chat as well. Yeah, I'm happy to share them. Go ahead, Jenny. I think you maybe.
I see the question about strong faith traditions and how to address that. That's a tough one, right? People that come from very fundamentalist traditions, whether Christian or Jewish or Muslim, that's a hard one. There's certainly folks who are of very orthodox religions who are out, who are trying to create spaces for LGBT folks in those religious faiths, those traditions. But it's a hard road to go down because there's not a lot of there's a lot of opposition. That's where a lot of the opposition to LGBTQ plus rights comes from, is from very conservative religious traditions. And so to try to change that is very difficult. But I think it comes, for me, if you're working with a parent, it comes down to, this is still your child. You may disagree with, and you may think it's a lifestyle, which of course it's not, it's who they are, but you may not accept who they are, but you have to accept that they're your child. Even if you don't like what they're doing with their lives, don't accept what they're doing with their lives, they're still your child. Would you rather have a live child or a dead child? Is what it comes down to oftentimes, sadly. Would you rather be able to be accepting or at least tolerant of this child, or do you not want a child at all? Because oftentimes that's what it comes down to, whether that child commits suicide or they just leave your life, and write you off. Which would you rather have? Sadly, some parents would want, would take the dead child, but hopefully most parents are going to recognize, I brought you into this world, or I helped raise you, and I love you no matter what. And I've seen some fantastic growth that parents have been able to go through, which in some cases has meant leaving those religious traditions and adopting a different religion that's more inclusive, more accepting, or in some ways it's still having their strong faith tradition, but recognizing that there's some ways that maybe their faith tradition doesn't have it entirely right.
Jenny, I just wanted to call your attention to a couple of questions in the chat. One
Please.
is about being publicly corrected in a Zoom meeting. How do you feel about being publicly corrected in a Zoom meeting? And then, and how would you suggest responding to people that don't want to listen or change their behavior or acceptance of others? Which I think
Okay,
you
so
could address
let me
just a
do
little bit.
the first part, the Zoom meeting. You know, there are different, it depends on the context of the meeting, right? Who's in the meeting, how comfortable you feel in saying something. Publicly, of course, there's always the chat function, right? To be able to, in most cases, unless it's a webinar or someone has turned off the chat feature, you could always privately chat someone and say, hey, you just misgendered that person. You know, that's a way to sort of do it without having to call undue attention to that. But I personally, if it feels okay to do it in a public context, I like that. Not to embarrass somebody, but because it's a reminder to everyone else. If you it goes back to the whole thing about if you don't say something, people assume that you're going along with it. So if someone misgenders someone, probably most of the people in the Zoom room recognize that just happened. You know, they heard it, and like if no one says anything, it's just, it can feel really awkward, especially if I'm that person who's been misgendered, and I know most of the people in the room know differently, know correctly, and no one else is saying anything. That feels kind of shitty. So, but I can also see context where it may not feel comfortable if it's, you know, like your boss is misgender somebody, or you don't really know the people in the room, and so you don't feel like you can say something. So I can see different context to it, but if you could, you know, I think there are ways to say something, whether in a meeting or privately, to do something. I think it's important to say something, if at all possible, to do that. And the second part was if someone just says, I don't give a shit. That was the question, basically.
Yeah, I think something along those lines. Responding
Okay.
to people.
I'm sorry, I swear a lot. Maybe I shouldn't do that.
So, I wonder how it's being translated into Spanish. So I think the question is how you suggest responding to people who don't want to change their behavior or acceptance of others, which I think
Well,
you did
to a certain
little
degree,
bit.
one has to, because it becomes discrimination, right? We have policies in most institutions that say you can't discriminate based upon sexual orientation, gender identity. We have it as state law in Massachusetts that one cannot discriminate based upon sexual orientation and gender identity. So, and that applies to, as I said, repeated misgendering, whether it's deliberate, but especially if it's deliberate or not, is considered to be harassment. And I think we're going to see more and more of that being enforced. Certainly the Biden administration has this on their radar with Title VII, Title IX, to making sure that trans people, but LGBT people in general, are respected in the workplace and in schools. So I think, you know, people are entitled to think whatever they want to think, right? No one's policing thought. We're policing, if you want to call it that, actions. You know, you can not name your group, but as far as the workplace goes, or any other sort of institutional context, you can't be mistreating that person or treating them differently because of that identity.
Thank you. And so it looks like Heather's got a question that she thinks might take a little while to answer. And I'm happy to give the rest of the time to that. I will just mention, because I normally mention this at the beginning. Actually, I don't think there's anybody in here who isn't already on our Food Policy Council list, so I won't even mention our survey, and I think you all know why you're here, so I'll just turn it over to you, Heather.
So my question is, if anyone is doing any work locally around the fact that the LGBTQ spectrum, I don't even know what to call it, is really white based. And I'm a member of a couple of groups, and I'm studying with a gentleman in Africa, and the concepts of sexuality and gender are very different. And the people that I'm studying with, just their perception is that white people didn't know anything about this, created this spectrum, and are trying to sort of reimpose it on people who never lost differing concepts of gender. So that's, I guess what it is I want to say that this is a really tight spectrum, and being really careful about dealing with anybody other than sort of European American colonial Western is a danger zone. And I'm wondering sort of how that's working in the Valley or not working.
Yeah, that is a big question, as you say. You know, racism, colonialism, you know, you might even say imperialism are definitely issues within the LGBTQ plus community, as they are in all communities. So these are issues that need to be addressed, and really oftentimes aren't being addressed in the Valley. I think a lot of times the intention is there. A lot of good white queer folk, and a lot of good white folk in general, but oftentimes don't know what to do, how to be inclusive, how to be in collaboration and in partnership with.
Well, it's sort of, what are we? It's more like our spectrum should be included inside a much bigger thing that doesn't need to be reinvented in the way that we need to reinvent ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because,
well,
for example, I have more than one person living in a body. They all have really different combinations of what you'd call gender and sexuality. And among people who are not white, I'm immediately recognized for who I am, and there's not a box. When I am in the white community, there's a box. And the box itself are those letters.
Well, that's I think that's why, you know, it's a tricky thing, because for a lot of people, having a box is a sense of belonging. You know, they you know, that's why is there this proliferation of different identities, of different names?
Okay, so not where I'm trying to go. I'm trying to go is there an understanding that the LGBTQ movement is in fact based in colonialism, and that's a problem?
To a degree, I think that there is, you know, our understanding of gender and sexuality is obviously very different than many non-Western contexts. You know, you look at the indigenous peoples of this country, many of whom had multiple genders. You know, we being white Europeans imposed a binary gender system upon them, and forced them to play by our rules, and make them to be as hating of non-binary people as white people were. Some of those cultures hung on to that, and still have those. Other ones that they've had to sort of reclaim that, or other people have tried to reclaim that. So yes, recognizing that there are many different ways in the world of looking at gender and sexuality, and certainly the way we do it in the West is just one way.
Got it. Okay. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all for being here. I really appreciated it. You have my presentation, right, Caitlin? So you can share with folks?
Yep, absolutely. I can share it out in English and Spanish. Hopefully we'll have English and Spanish recordings to share out as well. And I really just appreciate you being here and spending this time with us, Jenny. It was a really informative presentation. I hope others enjoyed it as well. Thanks everybody for sticking around. I know we had some tech glitches at the beginning there, so I always appreciate people sticking with it.
All right. Nice to virtually meet you all. Take care.
Rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Where's the bye button?